Hey, mate, 40 here. So I'm only live streaming tonight instead of kicking back, watching the football with the sound off, listening to Michael Wolff's biography of Rupert Murdoch on Audible and enjoy some high quality football. But I'm ticked off because I was trying to help somebody out today and I did what he asked, but much of what he asked me to do, he doesn't recollect correctly. And it's just so frustrating. Like I followed directions. I was trying to help some dude out, and it did not go well. Bloody hell. So I wanted to come online, and I just want to yell at somebody. You notice a lot of live streamers, right? They seem to get a great deal of power. They get to, vent a lot of frustrations in their life by just yelling at somebody. And Chris Kavanaugh made this point rather profoundly on Decoding the Gurus.
I've already said this many times. We're going to do like some of the streamers, Destiny, Hassan Abi, these type of people, because it's an interesting ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem which is rife with parasocial manipulations and egomaniacs running wild. So it's a good location for secular gurus. But the result is that I ended up watching these, they're called drama channels, Matt. Like they're basically like, they're YouTube channels which exist to talk about YouTube drama, like between creators, this kind of thing.
Okay.
And
yeah.
not the worst of them, not like the ones that are completely like what's the equivalent in the old media, like what do you call that TV or that channel is just all about celebrities, like what are you wearing on the red carpet, and ETV or something like that, like Paris Hilton.
Is there anything called like TZ or something, or
TMZ? Yes, TMZ. Yeah, so there's like YouTube channels like that. The channels that I saw are not that bad, but they're kind of like, here is some bad creator, look at all the bad things he does. It looks kind of familiar in some ways for them. So I was just watching videos of that, Matt, and just those ecosystems, those personalities, they're egomaniacs, and the way that they're interacting with their audience, like, they sit on the stream and they're kind of drinking their coffee or whatever, like what I'm going to be doing in a minute. But then when somebody says something they don't like, it depends on the creator, but they get like, what? You fucking idiot. You just, you stupid, blah, blah, and they're just, blah, 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 and getting all animated. And that's part of the appeal. But like, obviously the other person is generally not there, right? They're just like a disembodied tech. So it's like a really one-sided, it's like a guru telling his followers off for daring to, question judgment. And I get really bad vibe.
Yeah. Now that's interesting, isn't it? So like they've written a little text or a comment, and then they get
like this.
Get
it would be like, what's next? Hey, what? Mooncat? What the fuck? Shut up, Mike. Like, you're an idiot. You just want to genocide the world, you stupid right? It's like that. And then, but obviously they have, huge chats, so it's just like a kind of interacting with a wall of text. But as I mentioned to you, I previously saw Stefan Molyneux's interactions with his audience, and it was very similar. Very, very similar dynamic. He would do call-in shows where people would call him in and ask for advice. And as soon as they said something he didn't like, he'd be like, yeah, that's why you're in this situation. This is why, blah, blah, blah. And
yeah, but people only abuse you really to the extent that you sign off on it, right? You generally sign off when other people lie to you and abuse you because you've given out that energy that you can be abused, that you can be taken advantage of, that you want to be deceived so that you can live in your delusions. Not 100%. I'm just saying that we play a significant role in how other people interact with us. So I got taken for hundreds, even thousands of dollars of scams when I was trying to make my way in Hollywood, checking out the acting world in 1994, 95, because those people met my needs to feel like I could be a star. Yes, these are my real teeth. I've never had braces. They've never had fake teeth. These are just my real fair dinkum teeth. But I wear this retainer that brings my lower jaw forward, but in the process, it has widened the teeth in my lower mandible, I think that's called. So I have gaps now in my lower teeth, but I keep wearing this retainer at night because it brings the lower jaw forward, and that's supposed to help open up the nasal passages or stuff like that. But yeah, I get more likely to get teeth stuck in, and the bottom row is not as clean and straight and compact as it was before I started in with this particular retainer that just brings my lower jaw forward. But I identify with this, right? I had one girlfriend who I yelled at. To the best of my knowledge, there's only ever been one girlfriend who I yelled at, but there's something about the dynamic of our relationship that kind of led me to yell at her. I'm not proud of that. I'm embarrassed about it, but I would yell at her when we were driving down the freeway. But she played a role in that, and I played a big role in that. And if people yell at you, abuse you, and lie to you on a regular basis, there's probably something that you're doing. And like, it's a very dangerous thing to help somebody, all right? Because the need to be rescued and the need to rescue usually come out of the same sick place. Now, there's healthy helping of people, and there's unhealthy, right? I remember I ran into this Holocaust survivor on a walk, and he talked to me about how lonely he was and how, you know, it'd just make his life if I would come visit him in the evening. So I decided to come visit him in the evenings. All he wanted to do was to be left alone to watch Fox News, right? He wanted no interactions. I visited him 1, 2, 3 evenings, and he made it clear he was not interested in my company. So people are complicated. Some people will, you know, call you up and tell you about their suicidal ideation. They will cry a river to you on the phone if you allow that. I don't think, generally speaking, it's a healthy thing to subsidize that sort of behavior. And this can happen with live streamers too. You can develop a relationship with a live streamer where they yell at you, and really, that's in part on you.
It just feels very like traditional guru dynamics, you know, like cult.
Does it actually help bringing my lower jaw forward to open up my nasal passages so I sleep better? I'm not sure. But do you remember when I used to do a lot of live streams with Dennis Dale? He's the only person, to the best of my knowledge, that I frequently yelled at. So there had to have been something about the dynamic between Dennis Dale and myself that I would speak to him in a more harsh tone than I would, I think, more than any other regular on my show. So there's something about that relationship, that long dead relationship with Dennis Dale, that often brought out, you know, a really not nice part of myself. Yeah, Dennis would have a reflex of saying, "I'm sorry." And I think the more Dennis said, "I'm sorry," the more I yelled at him. And then the first time Ricardo called in, it was to say, "Dennis, you got to stop saying I'm sorry." And Ricardo didn't say this, but if you keep saying I'm sorry, and if you keep like taking unnecessary blame on yourself, then people will just keep blaming you and yell at you, right? So on the one hand, it sounds like a great thing to do is like take responsibility. Oh, that's all my fault. I'm sorry. That's totally my fault. But you can go too far with that. You can abuse that. You can, you know, go, you know, to an extreme with that, and it becomes an unhealthy relationship dynamic that you're assembling with people, so that they just feel, you know, totally free to blame you for all sorts of things that aren't fully your fault, and to start yelling at you and disparaging you. And you played a role. I play a role in many people treating me with disrespect because I am maladaptively vulnerable. I'm like way too vulnerable. I think I become too vulnerable to, I don't know, get out of, you know, complicated or demanding situations, to create drama, to try to create, you know, undue intimacy and intensity in my relations, just try to, you know, make a shortcut to have good relations with people, to wear my heart on the sleeve. And in the process, I'm just way too vulnerable. And then people frequently treat me with disgust or just disrespect. And I am inviting that. All right. I've got this habit of being overly vulnerable, and then I don't like the results of that.
Leadership.
Yeah, like you single people out for bastardization, right?
Yeah.
It is like a very old-fashioned social control technique, where if there's got a big group of people, the big boss person will pick someone out and bastardize them, essentially, and everyone else kind of observes and kind of gets a bit of a thrill from.
Right. If people are picking you out to yell at, there's a good chance that you played a significant role. When I have told my friends how various employers or employers at the time were treating me, most of my friends who are high functioning said, I would not put out with that for 30 seconds. But I put out the vibe that I could be abused because I was used to that, because I was bounced off the walls growing up. You know, I was smacked around. I was used to being abused. So even into my 50s, I being abused by people in authority felt normal, natural, felt like I was at home when someone was berating me, deriding me, cutting me down for no good purpose, you know, just treating me terribly. That felt like our home, right? We learn certain patterns, certain habits, certain things that feel comfortable to us. And I learned in my childhood that being abused, being smacked around verbally and physically, that felt like home to me. I remember I used to do one of these podcast shows 20 years ago, and my co-host James DeGiorgio said, you'd be a battered husband. You'd just be a classic battered husband, and all you do would be whine and complain about it. And various pornographers who specialize in sadomasochism were able to very quickly point out that I had a fetish for being, you know, verbally hurt. I had a fetish for basically encouraging people to treat me with disrespect. And consciously, no. I hate being treated with disrespect. I hate being hurt. But I would consistently act and invite that sort of behavior.
Not being the one being
and
bastardized.
Scott Adams did it, right? We've heard it. Scott Adams doing that in some of his content. But the thing is, lots of these people are doing that in their, and their politics are all over the map. Like Hassan Abi is like a leftist, right? And this is actually useful for us because we've been saying, it would be good to look at people from the left side of the spectrum. And problem is, most of the IDW types, they almost all identify as centrists or left-leaning people, but like they're not really, right? But there are left-leaning people doing the parasocial exploitative stuff, but I think a lot of them hang out on YouTube and Twitch. So yeah, we might find them there. Anyway,
the more I hear about this internet thing, Chris, the less I care for it.
Yeah, it's a bad idea. I also saw a message. That thing that went viral a while back, where you have the TikTokers or whatever, the TikTokers and the Twitchers, where they're kind of doing reactions when people pay like money. They're saying yum yum, like ice cream or whatever, right?
Yum yum.
But what somebody pointed out is, like, if you don't watch the stream, for a large part of that stream, they're doing the like just waiting and a reaction, like because they're not being paid money all the time, right? So a lot of it, they just have like a like NPC resting face movements, which they're just doing. It's fucking
right. You can throw down super chats. I'm Rumble right now. I'm on Rumble /Luke Ford, and throw down a super chat. I'll say yum yum, yum yum yum.
Until they get a reaction, then they, it's like somebody putting the money into the machine and the thing comes to life. But you're like, but you're not a NPC, right? You're not a computer.
you're a human being.
What's happening?
So it's weird, isn't it? It's like pure objectification, right? Like there isn't necessarily a sexual component, because people usually use that word in relation to that.
Attractive.
They are very attractive, right? But I think I think if it is like that, it is abstracted away to such a weird degree that who knows what it's tickling. But it's clearly objectification, right? The person is acting like a robot, like an anime character, and they're responding just like if you press a button, you put the coin in the slot. That's just so odd.
Right. So the chat says, I whack off. This is a woman saying, I whack off to the idea of my boyfriend cheating on me in real life. I would never, in real life get off on that. So yeah, we all have a dark side. And I was just talking to a sponsee about this a few minutes ago. All our self-destructive, maladaptive behaviors, like me being overly vulnerable, that's meeting a real need, right? The reason that we are maladaptively doing things is because we are not meeting our needs through our regular life. So why am I going around making myself like way too vulnerable for my own good? Because in all likelihood, I'm not meeting sufficiently my needs for intimacy, intense connection with other people through healthy ways. So I'm using unhealthy ways to try to meet those needs. I mean, other blokes, they're not getting their intimacy needs and their needs for like intense closeness with people. So they're, going to glory holes or bathhouses, or, hiring prostitutes, or looking at pornography, or getting high, or doing drugs, right? So we have legitimate needs. If we don't meet our needs legitimately in healthy ways, like through our, say, 12-step recovery program, through our religion, through our yoga, through our spiritual practices, right, we're going to meet them in a sick way. So I have a need for drama. And so I think I make myself unnecessarily vulnerable. I try to create inappropriately intense relationships in many contexts. I like to, play a lot of games with some people in my life, because I like to feed, my need for, for drama. But there are healthy ways to feed my need for drama, such as by doing these informative, provocative, enthralling, entertaining live streams. That's like a healthier way for me to meet my need for drama. I have a great need for freedom. And so I have consistently self-sabotaged relationships, work situations, communal situations, so that I could feel free, because all human interactions are going to get messy. Like, all human interactions are going to touch on parts of you that feel awkward and that you don't want to be reminded that you have these vulnerabilities. And so I have consistently, in the course of my life, wanted to just drop, flames and petrol and gasoline and cigarettes and lighters, and just blow things up so that I could feel free again, because I was feeling hemmed in, captured. Parts of me were feeling very awkward because of some, ongoing interaction I had, such as a job or friendship or a communal relationship. So instead, I can healthfully create that feeling of freedom by saving money, by overcoming my various emotional addictions, by setting aside time for myself and for doing what I want, getting clear about what's important to me and pursuing those goals. Okay, so yeah, if we don't meet our needs through healthy ways, we're going to meet them through very sick, maladaptive ways. But when we find out we're stuck in some, self-destructive pattern, we have to ask, like, what legitimate, what real needs is this meeting? How is this seemingly self-destructive, maladaptive trait, character trait, behavior, habit, pattern? How is that serving me? Then how is it hurting me? How would I benefit from being in the opposite of it?
At the hipster scene in London before it had kind of emerged from what it is. So it's Charlie Brooker doing a very dark comedy about a guy dealing with basically Vice and magazines like that, and just noticing how superficial and stupid everything is. Very good. Only 6 episodes I think ever made, but very good.
What's it called again? Tell me the title.
Nathan Barley.
Nathan Barley? Isn't Barley?
Barley, like the way he speaks there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nathan Barley. It's very good. If you like dark places and stuff, you'll like that. Okay. Oh yeah. Look, see, Brian is right. It is true, and I was going to point this out, Matt.
David Brent.
And look, I'll give you a theory of comedy that helps you here, Matt. Like Basil Fawlty and stuff. They are in the lineage of that, right? A bit more broader commentary, but the whole point is kind of even Dad's Army and stuff like that. In the kind of teaching stuff.
Whoops! I pushed the wrong link. Here we go.
I know I'm sounding more and more like a boomer, but it's all this very weird.
Well, Mark Klingman is making a good point that you have the people in the street performers, right, who are dressed up like statues and move around when you put the money in.
That's true. That's
but there's something
people don't think there's anything creepy about the street performers acting like statues. they're objectifying themselves. They're a little bit creepy. Mine's a creepy.
Yeah, there's something about that where it's. I guess this is it. Unfortunately, you're right, Mark. That is probably a good.
Right, I have a need to perform. Right, if I don't perform on YouTube, all right, I might perform in some very inappropriate places, in inappropriate ways, with inappropriate audiences, with inappropriate levels of audience interaction with my performances.
Good analogy that this is just the online version of that, but it's just so fucking weird. So weird. What do I use to groom my beard so precisely?
Okay, and I was up, went to bed at 7 and got up at 3:37 a.m. this morning. I'm not sure I got this queued up right. I sure hope this is correct.
Actually, hold on, because I've listened to that, and I think he knows Arabic, or he knows, he definitely knows Arabic speakers. But he said,
yeah, this is good. This is really good. From Decoding the Gurus, Chris Kavanaugh, Matt Brown.
Record an interview with Dag Soros, the Norwegian comedian, for his podcast. I don't think I definitely talked about this with him. But and I told you about this, so and it will come up if we do the Sam Harris episode. That Sam was talking about, people may or may not have heard this recording of a Hamas terrorist calling his family back in Gaza and kind of proudly talking about all the people that he's killed. And the transcript of the conversation, one, it's very clear that the Hamas guy is very proud of killing the Israeli civilians. He's telling people, look on the phone, you can see the 10 Jewish people I killed with my own hands. I killed them. This is great. It's but the additional layer that was added onto that analysis is that the parents and the family seem happy and are not responding in horror, right? So this is more horrific because it's somebody doing horrific actions, but their family are not reacting in horror. And this is a potential concern because it would speak to All
right, so most people, their thinking just goes down certain tracks. They get certain stimuli and then they just, inevitably go down a certain track. They don't really take the time to consider what's really going on. They just seize what's immediately appealing and feeds their needs.
The level of
radicalization
in the general community. But when Sam raised this, so if you look at the transcript, there are various things where the parents say things like, praise be to Allah, or something like this, right? And Graham Wood, the journalist who has more specialism in this, said, whenever Sam raised this topic with him, said, actually, hold on, because...
So Graham Wood wrote a profile of Richard Spencer. He kind of specializes in jihadi terrorism. He's a thoughtful journalist. Writes for The Atlantic.
I've listened to that, and I think he knows Arabic, or he knows, he definitely knows Arabic speakers. But he said, I actually think that you're misinterpreting that, because if you listen, they are using stock phrases that you hear. The same way someone might say Jesus Christ or oh my God, right? But they're not invoking praise be to the Most High Jesus Christ. Right? I say it, but it's because of the Islamic culture. Just there's lots of stock phrases that reference Allah or whatever the case might be. And then Graham Wood says, to me, it sounds like they're reacting out of disbelief and shock, and they're kind of saying, what are you talking about? Where are you? What's going on? Oh, and instead of it being praise be to Allah, it's like praise be to Allah, Jesus Christ. What are you talking? And the mom is crying at one stage, and Sam presented that as tears of joy. It doesn't sound like that but in any case, I don't know. So when I saw the transcript online, I had the same reaction of Sam, initially, where I was like, oh, this looks concerning, right? That there isn't the outreach. But then when I heard somebody who knows a bit about the topic and might understand the language better, raise that actually it's a misinterpretation, I thought, oh, I don't know. I shouldn't pass judgment, and that is plausible. But Sam, in the next episode that he released does a long segment with the same interpretation that he initially had of the call. And at the very end, he says, Graham Wood has an alternative, but I'm not so sure about that, or something. And then moves on. And it's like, wow. Like,
it just speaks to his thinking being on rails. And, we're dunking on sand, but there's like a general principle to be absorbed here, right? Which is that when you've got too strong, you could call it ideological, you could call it theoretical, but you've got too strong a mental framework that you're wanting to filter all the information through, then what you clearly do is you just ignore the disconfirming evidence that doesn't fit, and you persist with a model as if all the evidence that's coming in is fitting your model perfectly, and that makes you unable to learn new things, basically, and it becomes kind of boring.
Yeah, because one thing that Yuval was emphasizing in that conversation was like, there's religious extremists on the Israeli side, right? The ones who are promoting the West Bank settlement, and actually a lot of Netanyahu's government, right? Like he was appealing to the far right of Israeli politics and the ones that are at least supporting.
I think that phrase, thinking on rails, since I heard it this morning, it just hasn't left my head. I think it's a really useful way of understanding some very common human tendencies.
By religious demagogues. But the way Sam had framed it was, that kind of one side has the religious fanatics and the other side is there's none of that.
Just an ideal secular democracy.
But so the position though was it's just more reasonable to. I'm not saying that therefore it's completely equivalent, right? But it's more like.
And comment in the chat from Hasidic Bel Delphine. These guys, quoting the gurus, are the worst. I don't know why Luke likes these insufferable morons. So boring, right? They're not as exciting as a Nick Fuentes or Richard Spencer and Ethan Ralph. Frequently profound truth is not immediately exciting. It's not a thrill, but I think that what they have to say is incredibly important here.
It's complex, and there are religious extremists on both sides, and there are moderating forces on both sides, and like that. Yeah, so basically, the black and white, like it's just jihadism. That's the only ideology that we really have an issue with, and Yuval raised the point that like plenty of people in the 20th century seem to do a lot of extreme activities for secular ideologies that didn't posit an eternal afterlife, right? Millions of people died in the furtherance of those objectives. So it's not that isn't an ideology, martyrdom, and so on, that is a problem, but it is that it's not the only potential driver for like conflicts. And, Ukraine and Russia, it's not relying on...
a fundamentalist thing. I mean, unless you try to shoehorn,
unless
you try to shoehorn nationalism into that. Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, reality is, messy and complicated, and that's deeply unsatisfying, I think, to everybody, right? It'd be really nice. It's really nice to have a nice, simple set of heuristics, a nice, simple, like, mental key that explains every problem. Like, wouldn't it be great if, everyone that we covered, Chris, they're all bloody grifters. That's what it is. They're all grifting, right? They're all grifters, right? Bang. If you wanted to, you pay attention to particular bits of evidence, and that could be the key that explains everything that's happening in this sphere. But unfortunately not. It's a bit more complicated. Yes, it's an element. It's just one of many. Some of it hangs together comfortably. Other things just don't really fit. So yeah.
Even in the case of narcissism, which we often emphasize, right? Like that you could completely exercise that and focus on some other element, like for example, the flows of money in the ecosystems, and I that wouldn't be wrong, right? It would be giving you a partial perspective, and the same thing would apply if you completely ignore the financial incentives that are in play and the network dynamics. So like it's
I see that as well, actually. Sorry, we keep elaborating on this point, but you see it crop up in so many different ways. I've got a lot of friends online who fall into that kind of liberal free speech forever type attitude, right? Yeah, so they see free speech as just this fundamental principle that is so important.
Okay, I enjoyed that little burst there from Decoding the Gurus. Also listening to the Duran making the point that we had a way out of this Ukraine crisis. We didn't have to get into this mess. Once we were into the mess, there was basically an agreement reached between Zelensky and Putin, but the Biden administration and the Boris Johnson administration in Britain said to Zelensky, no way, you've got to get all your territory back. You can't compromise at all, even though we could have ended this war shortly after it began. And so a lot of politicians like Joe Biden and the head of NATO, right, they have their egos on the line. They think it will be good for their reputation, right, for their career prospects to keep this bloody slaughter going on in Ukraine. This is from the Duran podcast.
Victory in Kiev, which as we now know is a complete fiction. I mean, we discussed that before. The Russians withdrew as part of a diplomatic deal which the West sabotaged. They talk about Kharkiv and Kherson region, and the Kharkiv offensive is being reversed, and the Kherson offensive is at a standstill, and the losses Ukraine suffered as a result of those were horrendous. But the realities today on the battlefronts anyway are completely different. But Stoltenberg, we won't talk about that. Annalena Baerbock won't talk about that. What she's doing instead is warning people about not being fatalistic about Ukraine. They must get on still supporting Ukraine, giving Ukraine everything so that it can continue the war until it is finally destroyed. I mean, the Russians say, that it's until the last Ukrainian, and that's what it's beginning to look like.
Yeah, it's almost like they want to. I guess it's like destroying the scene of the crime. I guess they just. I think Stoltenberg, von der Leyen, Annalena, Zelensky, Yermak, all these people. They're so up to their neck in so much just crap. Just nasty crap that they've decided let's just destroy the whole thing, and Russia did it.
Exactly.
And that's what they're doing.
Blame it all on Putin. Blame it all on the Russians. When Ukraine is destroyed, all this, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. It's all Putin's fault. And because it's all Putin's fault, we must take even more steps to insulate and protect and defend Europe from him, and clamp down even more on anybody in Europe who says otherwise. So that is the agenda now.
Yeah, let me just to wrap up the video. Let me read you a quote, and I want your thoughts, your human psychology input.
So much of the drive for suppressing speech online and accusing anyone who differs from the ruling regime with regard to incentivizing and subsidizing Ukraine's war with Russia is we need to restrict speech so that we don't give succor to our enemies. So we create this horrific situation in Ukraine and then try to restrict speech so that those who are subsidizing and directing this horrific situation in Ukraine, right, they get more protection from being criticized.
On this, just so we understand how these people think, and this has to do with Brexit, but I think you'll be able to relate this to Ukraine. So Ursula von der Leyen, she gave an interview or made some comments about Brexit and how the UK is now looking to move back into the European Union. That's the trajectory of things. And she said this: I keep telling my children, and she's talking about Brexit, I keep telling my children, you have to fix it. We goofed up. You have to fix it. So I think here too, the direction of travel, my personal opinion, is clear. I just read that quote, we goofed up. And I just think, this is the way these people think. This is how they're going to explain everything. When it all collapses, it's just going to be like, what are your thoughts on that? Just the psychology of these globalists in these institutions is it just sickens you. But anyway, that's how they see the world.
Oh yeah, I mean, that is exactly what they're going to do. We acted out of good faith. It was a mistake. We made mistakes, as we did with Iraq, as we did with Libya, but we acted with the best of intentions all along. And if everything in the end turned out bad, well, it was not our fault. It was because there wasn't enough will and determination. People didn't give as much money as they should have done. They didn't give as much weapons as they should have done. They could have given more. Never explained how that could have happened. And of course, in the end, in this particular crisis, it's absolutely not our fault. It's the fault of the horrible man in the Kremlin and these terrible people around him, Putin and his accomplices. They are the people who ruined our beautiful dream. And, the only responsibility you take is that you made certain mistakes. You goofed. You goofed up. You still want all those hundreds of thousands of students and women to go to the battlefronts. But that's only a mistake if they had died. It's only a mistake on your part if they died. I mean, it's good that we make these programs now because when those excuses are made.
Right. This war would not have happened if Donald Trump had been in the White House. I don't think there would have been a massive Hamas attack on Israel and therefore an Israeli invasion of Gaza if Donald Trump had been in the White House. And we've been unnecessarily provocative with China over Taiwan. We could get into an absolute mess there as well. This is the most seemingly competent, but really the most incompetent foreign policy administration that the United States has had in 70 plus years.
We have programs like this as a public record of what it really all amounted to. Before we finish, just wanted to say, I noticed that in Britain, and I mentioned it on my program of my own channel yesterday, they're now resurrecting the story that it was actually Putin who turned down the prospects of peace last year. That there was this mysterious deal that nobody knows anything about that was negotiated with Kozak, Kozak, Putin's official, that he did some kind of a deal with the Ukrainians and that Putin rejected it. There is absolutely, just to say again, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for that story, but it again tells you that deep down, the British know full well what they actually did in March and April of last year when they knocked away the chance Ukraine had to agree to a peace. We see the same comments now being made by Arestovich. Arestovich has confirmed that as well, that Ukraine had a good peace deal then, and it was all thrown away. And the British
he said very good, very favorable peace deal, he said. He actually said the Russians made a lot of concessions. Sorry, that's what he said.
Exactly. So a very, very good peace deal was made last year. The British played an instrumental role in throwing it away, but they're starting to get nervous that people are going to start pointing the fingers at them. So they're now falling back again on this fictitious story about this other deal that was supposed to...
What do I make about all the assassination talk with regard to Donald Trump? Well, I think The Atlantic, didn't they just have something like 40 different intellectuals write essays on why it'd be a disaster to have Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. So, yeah, there's there are all these incentives being laid, just like there were incentives laid for the massive increase in violent crime we've had since George Floyd. We have all these incentives laid for an assassination of Donald Trump. I think that ground is being prepared. Okay, let's get a little bit of a lighter note. This is Tim Heidecker on Joe Rogan.
Look at the Joe Rogan clip. Because again, stop. If Joe Rogan, if you want to be an expert on this, stop doing your silly show with your Fuddruckers background.
I'm a fatty fat though.
All right, here's Joe.
For young boys in particular, there's an adverse risk associated with the vaccine. It's like a 2 to 4-fold increase in the instances of myocarditis.
Yes, but you know what?
Hospitalization.
You know that there's an increased risk of myocarditis among that age cohort from getting COVID as well, which exceeds the risk of myocarditis from the vaccine.
I don't think that's true. I don't think
It
it's
is.
true.
He doesn't think it's true,
I don't
guy.
think it's true that there's an
Well,
increased
who are
risk
you?
of myocarditis from people catching COVID that are young versus increased risk of myocarditis from the vaccine.
Look at you.
No, there is.
Pause.
There's
Listen to this. Joe
He's
Rogan
thinking so
saying
hard about
myocarditis. What?
Right.
I don't even know what that is. And why should I? I just go to the doctor, and the doctor tells me what to do.
Right.
And hopefully it all works out for the best.
Right.
There is. There's both.
Well, let's look that up because I don't think that's
Let's
true.
look
There's
that. Where are you
Myocarditis
looking
is
it
more
up?
common
In the
after
New
COVID-19
England Journal of
infection than
Medicine?
vaccination. But is this with children?
In Grey's Anatomy? What? Some fucking website.
Yeah, we're talking about young
like
people.
this is the.
Men and
They go
boys
down this.
aged
They're
under 30
lost. They're just lost.
With children.
Because there's
is
so
the
much
issue.
information.
Well, no, we're
Right?
talking about 15-year-olds.
There's so much
Well, we're talking about
information,
young
and so poor Joe
children.
Rogan, his brain's just melting with all this information. He can't dissect it. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Joe, if you want to be an expert on this subject, stop doing your daily dumb show where you talk to fucking whoever, some dick comedian who's talking about whatever.
Yeah.
Give me something there. Who's he talking to?
Ted Nugent.
Ted Nugent about hunting and goggles and everything and eating meat. Stop your show. Go enroll at Austin University's medical fucking university, right? And become a doctor.
Yeah, good question in the chat from Elliot Black. Why did certain countries like Sweden and Denmark and I believe the state of Queensland in Australia ban the Moderna vax, citing myocarditis? Because there were studies revealing that there was a chance of some kind of myocarditis reaction among a tiny, tiny number of people to the vaccine. What these countries did not take into adequate account is that the risks of myocarditis are much, much higher for people who catch COVID. So people see a risk with doing a certain procedure and they go, oh, we should not have that procedure done. What they frequently don't consider is what's the risk if you don't do the procedure or you don't take the vaccine or if you don't engage in that activity. Yeah, everything comes with a risk. One needs to make prudent choices on what type of risk you want to take. This is Tim Heidecker. I'm Bill Maher.
What is the part of it that bums you out the most? The part that gets me is seeing a casual Bill Maher where he's got the T-shirt underneath the button-down shirt, and
it's very close to the Steve Buscemi, hey kids.
Yeah, exactly. Look. Like and then that sad table
with the just packed to the gills. Everything's ready to fall over.
But it's also just
like clinking.
Yeah. He's like reaches over.
He's like a real compulsion to like light things and
keep
ice.
Moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll be talking to you while doing.
Well, what he'll do is he'll ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can do it here.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to this summer?
Well, I've really been
like right as soon as it's immediate.
Yeah.
Like he should do it while he's talking.
Yeah. You do it when you're exactly.
So the little things like that are amazing, and then just his general point of view is just turned into grumpy man, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
and he's not interested in what the other person has to say.
No,
and he's combative.
He's fighting. He's closed shop in his head.
Yeah.
Everything I've come up with is the answer.
Yes, the new rule has been
no
written
room
in stone.
Yeah, no room for anything else. And I'm going to be weirdly petulant about it, that you might dare to not see it the way I see it.
Yeah, and then the guests don't seem to know that. Like, none of the guests have watched the show. They might now. They have maybe caught up, but in the first bunch, you could feel that they were not expecting to be sabotaged like this.
Where they're just like
pounced on.
They're like, wait, this is what this is?
Yeah.
I thought this was the HBO thing.
Yeah.
Like, they're checking the address. They're driving like, yeah, I'm going to do Bill Maher's show.
Yeah.
And then suddenly
they're going up a hill. They're
like,
going up
turn
like a
right.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
I think I'm going to CBS Television City or
exactly.
studio.
They'll be like in the hills. They'll be just like 0.2 of a mile before I'm here. Where am I going? This has to be wrong.
Okay, some interesting comments in the chat. Here we go. Hasidic Bell Delphine. No one watches Luke Ford anymore because he hates his viewers and thinks that people like Douglas Murray are shallow. There's a lot of truth to that. I am not, going to do a show that just panders to people's, dumb prejudices. I'm not going to do a show where I'm just telling you that, you're so great and your favorite right-wing intellectuals are just amazing if they're not. And I'm not going to say that, the deep state is, responsible for, most of the problems in our lives and the elite are trying to destroy Western civilization. I'm not going to give you that crap. You've got hundreds of right-wing shows that will just dish out the crap. All right. You want to be lied to. All right. You want to go on a live stream so that you can have, some intellectual masturbation where just, or your knee-jerk 100 IQ prejudices are reinforced. There are a lot of other shows that are much better for that than this show, right? We go deep here. Is there really inconclusive evidence that the vax actually prevented? Is there really conclusive evidence that the vax prevented COVID? Well, no one's smart. There are no scientific studies, to the best of my knowledge, of any prestige arguing that the vax prevents COVID. What they argue is that it reduces the severity of COVID and reduces the transmission of COVID and reduces infection rates with COVID. My entire family is vax-maxed. Every single one got COVID. Yeah, so what? I mean, this is just reasoning from anecdote. Either COVID vaccines reduce the intensity of COVID, reduce death from COVID, reduce hospitalization from COVID, or it doesn't. And so it's just a matter of the studies. Yeah, the deep state supports this channel. Absolutely. Vaccines never promise immunity. All right. Vaccine efficacy lasts about 8 weeks, says the chat. Well, there's some efficacy at reducing the severity of COVID and reducing the number of people who even catch COVID and die from COVID. I think the evidence is pretty clear that vaccines that are approved by the United States and other first world governments are overwhelmingly safe and are more effective than doing nothing. But I'm not an expert enough on vaccines, so I'm not gonna belabor that point. I just simply don't know enough. But the Duran's absolutely right, thinking about how our leaders, for the sake of their own prestige and political prospects, have subsidized this war in Ukraine. And wouldn't you know it, just as I go to play that link, the player crashes. All right, little bit of a discussion here by Chris Kavanaugh and Matt Brown on their favorite form of comedy.
Well,
yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah,
it's my theory of British comedy.
I think it's my favorite brand of comedy. It's good.
Yeah.
American comedy, like maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was fashionable in my circles here in Australia. But American comedy kind of sucked a bit. I mean, it's maybe Seinfeld. This is what we used to say to each other.
Seinfeld was not 10 years ago.
No, I said 15, like a while ago, when I was young.
Okay, yeah.
Just look at it, how long ago that was. It was a long time ago.
It was a while ago.
And how wrong we were. American comedy is a renaissance.
Yeah, a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, just have absolute contempt for America and for American culture and American comedy. And there's a lot of great American TV. There's a lot of great American culture. There are a lot of great things about America, just as there are great things about Britain and England and France and Denmark and Australia and New Zealand and Japan as well. But I I mean, Richard Spencer just has this knee-jerk contempt for, all things American. But America makes some, pretty good comedy.
Yeah.
Sorry, David. Like there's read that recent. There's so much edgy, weird stuff like that. I think you should leave, guys.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that guy's good.
It's pretty good.
Even Dave Chappelle and all that were good. They're a little bit long in the tooth. I mean, a little bit long in the tooth. They're pretty. That's almost like watching a Joe Rogan special now. But still, stand up is good and things.
There used to be this stereotype that America, amongst English-speaking foreigners, that American comedy was kind of broad and obvious and whatever. At least in my circles.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, that's a really common critique, particularly among Australians and Europeans, that American comedy is just broad and stupid.
But then again, England had Benny Hill, so he just.
Did anyone watch Benny Hill? I don't think
nobody treated that as no. That's such. But yeah. No, anyway, we're totally wrong. But there you go, America, cultural powerhouse. That's my.
You come to the Gurus, and instead you learn a lot about British comedy. When I was a child, the girls on Benny Hill give me tingles. That is Chris Fanos saying that, not me. I was not young enough to experience Benny Hill. Eurotrash.
Well, Chris, you're my age, aren't you? Well, close, thereabouts. You must have watched the Goodies. The Goodies had when I was a kid. There was no sense. They didn't have censorship. Yeah, okay, we're very close. The Goodies, like they didn't have Monkey Magic, Japanese thing, or that they translated over, Chris. They didn't really have censorship for kids, so little kids got to, there was tittillating things during children's television.
Well,
I live
in Japan, Matt. There are plenty of titillating things on children's programs. They're
still holding on to that.
Oh yes, they are. It's quite amusing. The manga covers that my 10-year-old son has are a sight to behold. But is it unhealthy for him to be exposed to the existence of inhuman-sized breasts? I don't know. I merely exist in the culture. I don't judge it. I'm an anthropologist.
You're an anthropologist, that's right.
He's an anthropologist. He just exists in the culture. He doesn't judge it. All right, a little bit more from Decoding the Gurus.
With it, that you need to be sort of willing to at least pay lip service to a bunch of stuff, which is kind of right on, and that's no problem for me personally.
Talking about diversity and inclusion statements.
There are a few people who get on their high horse about it. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
There's no pushback that you have to pay lip service to anything, because I guess like a good DI statement from you guys, or say Yoel, or Mirti and the man's name I forgot on the last Patreon upload. But I mean, all of you, a decent DI statement would just be talking about your actual podcast, and the fact that you're spreading this academic knowledge to those people who are not in the academy. But you are right that on some level that is still just you needing to learn how to write to promote yourself, which is a big part of academia and grant writing in general. But also it's a part of another thing that those statements are meant to do. And again,
so Chris Kavanaugh and Matt Brown, they met up on Twitter because they both were somewhat heterodox while loathing the intellectual dark web. So they're basically center-left liberals who both tire of liberal-left hypocrisy, but also have disdain for the low IQ intellectual dark web.
This is kind of just another hoop to jump through on some level, is the fact that you're meant to try to look at your past and align it with like the overall mission statement of the university, things like that. However, it's also important to note that part of your job as a professor is to do that at the national level when you're writing grants, or international level. Like you need to look at the organization's like actual mission statement, what, for like the national things in America that fund research, you need to look at, this year, what are they really trying to hype up? And so on some level, needing to go to the school's website and look up all those things is selecting for someone who's going to be able to write good grants. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of these tests, whether they're diversity and inclusion statements, they're really just tests. Are you willing to follow directions? Are you willing not to be a dick and to get along with people? All right. If you're going to get along with people, you're going to have to go along with a lot of crap. All right. Not everyone else is going to see things the way you do.
I think you're right. I think it does perform this function. And I've kind of said this before, which is I think, and this isn't really a dig, it's more just like a sociological observation, that it is like back in the Victorian era where people that wanted to become part of the British civil service and get into the sort of rungs of power would get sounded out. Did they go to the right clubs, and did they have the right opinions and whatever? And I'm not, that sounds more pejorative than I mean it to be, but I think there is some of that, right? So in a university, like if you want to become a dean or a deputy vice chancellor or whatever, a lot of it is like our universities are corporations, just like Berkeley, I assume. And frankly, they are primarily concerned with not having scandals, not having people that are going to become a massive problem. And part of it is actually demonstrating that you're not a weirdo, and you're not going to like swim against the stream and call. Right.
This is like most jobs. The number one reason people get fired is they become seen as a liability. They're just weird, off-putting, that they make other people uncomfortable, that they're not willing to, play nicely with others. Cause
massive problems. And I think that's not a political observation. That's just a sociological observation. And I think a lot of those statements can. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to let you finish. I was just saying any group of humans would do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
on some level.
yeah.
I think that the part where everyone can clasp hands is over the fact that the university system is like pretty cynical and business orientated and like exploitative of like, you know, postdoctoral labor and
Right. So businesses, employers want you to show that you're willing to play nicely with others, right? You're willing to get along, not be too weird, and be willing to submerge your own opinions and your own preferences to play nicely with the group. A little bit more from this show, Decoding the Gurus.
really seems to, every time he has a big appearance, like on Rogan or whatever, he has to tear up at some point. He's just
talking about Jordan Peterson.
It's like, he's not very well. He's a very odd man, like in so many respects. And yeah, I think he's got progressively stranger, but he's definitely now, if somebody regards him as their role model now, and they're still watching what he's doing, it's kind of like, I don't know that there's that much hope left.
But I think this whole kind of like sort of going down a rabbit hole thing sounds really like stupid from the outside, but when I sort of realized that as I was so what happened was that I lost my job because of COVID lockdowns. Which I think is people don't really, if it's not affected you, it doesn't sort of
right. If your life was, severely diminished, if you lost your job, through COVID lockdowns, there are all sorts of incentives for why you'd be much more likely to believe in conspiracy theories.
You don't sort of realize how big a thing it is. So it's kind of that sort of being vulnerable, being stuck in this situation and not knowing what's going to happen next makes you more skeptical about like what's going on, who's got your best interests at heart and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I was kind of lucky enough that I got a new job fairly quickly after that. And so I kind of gradually start to move away from this kind of content. But I think what Decoding the Gurus is different from the stuff that I would kind of listen to before was more, like Majority Report. Apart from being like so focused on American politics, is that it just takes the piss out of people. And so if there's one area which you think, okay, maybe I agree with them about, American, medical insurance or guns or whatever, you agree with them, but then they say something really exaggerated about like transgenderism or about like I don't know, forcing people to get vaccines or whatever, then you kind of can't really fully subscribe to it because you feel like they're so, and especially with the Majority Report now, I can't watch them because they don't give people the benefit of the doubt and they're really vitriolic. So I think it's really much more useful to really look at what are these people actually saying and what is true and what is just complete exaggeration. So.
I think.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Matt. You've been silent.
I was just going to say it's true, isn't it? Like if you've lost your job as a result of the COVID lockdowns, and a lot of people did, and it hits differently than if you're someone that's just, I'm working from home now for a little while.
Right. I mean, COVID didn't negatively affect my life. Like I enjoyed the opportunity to just read more, and I mean, I'm on easy street compared to tens of millions of people who intensely suffered from the lockdowns. So of course, being open to the lockdowns were a good idea, as I am open to that. I'm not committed to it, but from the available evidence, it seems to me that in general, the lockdowns at certain times were a good idea, but I didn't suffer from the COVID lockdowns.
And I was one of the lucky ones. I was could just work from home and it was no big deal. I basically experienced no impact from it whatsoever. But I could hear secondhand from heaps of people who were like really adversely affected by it. And it's true what you say. It takes actually a leap of empathy to go, okay, that's not happening to me, but I can imagine that if that was me, then that would be quite bad. And when people are in difficult situations, that's when you're more receptive to people going, well, if there's someone saying, look, this is all a crock of shit, this was all totally unfair, this shouldn't have happened to you, then that's obviously a message that's gonna appeal.
Yeah.
So
you're just in that short term, you're like, you don't know where's your salary going to come from, where are you going to pay the bills,
Right. These are 3 PhDs speaking, right? These are 3 academics, all right, people who, generally center left. But this woman saying, due to the devastation of COVID lockdown, she started to entertain many of the conspiracy theories on the right.
You're not thinking about like what's the best policy for oh yeah, maybe I don't need to buy food because to stop some people getting infected with the virus. Those things happen all the time. You have to make those kind of sacrifices. But it just feels like why me? Sounds really stupid.
I think that's very understandable and like a kind of intuitive and reasonable reaction to that situation. And I think that like in the positive aspects, some of the people that we cover do express like genuine sympathy for people in those, and I think people notice that. But on the other hand, it's like I also see a cynical exploitation of people who are genuine.
So yeah, some people think I hate my viewers and that I lack empathy and sympathy for the sufferings that they endured during COVID, and perhaps I need to enlarge my heart and be a better man and develop my empathy. But yeah, it's easy to take advantage of people's suffering to try to sell them a whole bunch of nonsense. All right, we've sent the USS Eisenhower into the Mediterranean. We've sent all sorts of American armed forces into the Middle East. We've got bases in Syria, right? Syria is a nation state that does not want us to have bases, military bases in their country. But do we give a damn about that? No, the United States has bases all over the Middle East. That's why so many American bases in the Middle East are getting hit by Iranian-based proxies, and Iranian-based proxies are not identical with Iran, right? Iranian proxies have agency, right? They can make decisions on their own. They can do things that Iran would not necessarily support. But the more military forces the United States puts into the Middle East, the more likely it is perhaps that there's some kind of conflagration, right? On the other hand, you could argue having all these aircraft carriers and nuclear-powered submarines that will intimidate Iran and its proxies from doing anything really naughty. On the other hand, you're increasing the chances that something awful happens. This is from the Duran.
All right, Alexander, let's talk about the war in Israel and Gaza. And I guess we could talk about the Eisenhower entering the Gulf. What's going on there? And of course, we have a whole lot of diplomacy happening in the Middle East. Blinken was in Israel. And my general sense of this is pretty much what we've been saying for the past 2-3 weeks. We've been pretty consistent in saying this, which is that the Biden White House, they've made a mess of the policy in Israel. Netanyahu has made a mess of things. And it seems like the Biden White House is trying to figure out a way to exit this. But
right. I'm as rabid a Zionist as you can get, but I think it's absolutely insane the United States so identified itself with Israel in this conflict. Everything that Israel does, everything that Israel does, the rest of the world, particularly the Arab Islamic world, interprets Israel as essentially co-equal, a part of an extension of the United States. And we didn't have to do this. It was insane that Joe Biden flew to Israel and embraced Bibi Netanyahu, right? It would have been much wiser for the United States to just say nothing, right? And as much as possible, stay out of this conflict that does not involve vital American interests. Right, we could very well get hit with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equivalent attacks to 9/11 because of our unnecessary intervention, very showily, very dramatically, very theatrically, flying to Israel to embrace Bibi Netanyahu. Right, I want Israel to be strong and to vanquish its enemies, but it was insane for America's leaders to just throw themselves, into the arms of Israel and essentially announce to the world that, Israel and America are essentially acting as one, right? That's going to reap a whirlwind, which will not be good for America or for Israel.
There are other forces involved, which perhaps are not so keen on exiting, and maybe one of those forces is Netanyahu himself, the man. But the more this war continues, the worse it gets for Israel and the United States. For Gaza, it's a horrific tragedy, but this is not going the way the U.S. and Israel probably thought it would go.
No, and can I just say, it's not been an easy conflict to cover, but I think the results that we see at the moment, where we are at this moment, this particular point in time, if you go back and look at all our programs right from the start of this affair, this particular twist in the fighting, you can see that we were saying that it would probably arrive at this point, provided there wasn't that greater escalation across the Middle East, which is a real potential possibility. That if it was just confined to Gaza, we would find...
Right, the United States is now, under the Biden administration, desperately trying to walk back their embrace of Bibi Netanyahu and Israel's invasion of Gaza. but it's a done deal, right? America put itself on train tracks, right? And they're going down the line here as Israel tries to root out Hamas in Gaza, and in the process, inevitably kills thousands upon thousands of civilians. And this is going to blow back on America, and it's all entirely unnecessary, right? The United States did not have to side so publicly with Israel.
Find ourselves in this particular situation where there is this kind of ceasefire. It's a very odd and complicated ceasefire. You can sense that some people in Israel want to end it and to resume the fighting. The Biden administration has suffered enormous political damage, both within the United States. There was even a meeting in which Biden apparently apologized.
And it was an own goal. It was completely unnecessary, just like we didn't have to send arms to Ukraine, right? By arming Ukraine. That's why Donald Trump got impeached in 2019, because he wasn't following through on congressional legislation that we must go arm Ukraine. The more we arm Ukraine, the more we incentivize Putin to go in and wreck it, right? We didn't have to get so deeply involved in Ukraine. Ukraine has nothing to do with America's vital strategic interests. Gaza, Hamas, the Middle East conflict doesn't have much to do with America's vital strategic interests, but we stuck, our big wet dick in there, and it may very well get cut off, and that's not going to feel very good.
Apologized to Muslims, to American Muslims, for appearing to question the figures of the numbers of people killed in Palestine, in Gaza, which is an astonishing thing to happen, by the way. But you can see that they are suffering political damage in the United States, and they have seen their whole political position in the Middle East massively damaged as well. I mean, they flirted, well, they didn't flirt, they played back at the beginning these ideas of people being relocated from Gaza into Sinai.
Right. Now, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, they may very well loathe Hamas as much or more than Israel, but to publicly sign on with, Israel invading Gaza to eradicate Hamas, it was just an own goal, just completely unnecessary, just a massive, massive blunder.
The Arab states said absolutely not. They've now had to accept that. We've had a whole series of conversations between Biden and Arab leaders, al-Sisi especially, the Egyptian leader, accepting that that's not going to happen. And we see the ceasefire. And you get every sense that the administration basically wants to see the ceasefire continue, because it's getting them, it's at least limiting the political damage. And there are reports that Egypt and Saudi Arabia are now working very hard together, and they're obviously both now going to be BRICS states before long, and they're working very hard to get this ceasefire confirmed by Security Council resolution. So all of that is now playing out very much as we sort of expected. But in some ways, an even more interesting development.
Yeah, and the chat notes, Russia's going to annex at least half of Ukraine. Correct, right? They have sacrificed too much. They do not trust the promises. Their opponents for very good reason, because Europe and America was consistently lying and deceiving and manipulating and abusing Russia, particularly when Russia was weak. And so while you could have forestalled the invasion in the first place, and you could have very quickly reached a peace deal. Now you've got tens of thousands of dead Ukrainians for no good reason.
And I don't want to downplay the significance of what's going on in Gaza, because it is the epicenter of this. But for me personally, perhaps I should say, a more interesting development is tracking the movements of the USS Eisenhower. It's a very powerful carrier. The United States has deployed 2 carrier task forces to the Middle East. It's deployed.
And it may very well be that the U.S. is going to use the Israel-Hamas conflict as a pretext to start bombing the heck out of Iran.
Missiles in the Middle East. It's to deploy aircraft in the Middle East. Those decisions all were taken at the start of October. They are all consistent, and we said this before, and I want to repeat this again. They are all consistent with plans for a massive strike on Iran. And that was clearly where events were going in early October, or would have gone had the demands of the neocons within the administration been heeded. And it's clear that those people in the first weeks were very, very much in the ascendancy. And the Eisenhower is now in the Persian Gulf, and it's locating precisely in the area where we would expect to see it if there was a plan to launch big airstrikes against Iran. Now, as I said, I think this is probably the product of decisions made in October. But the fact that it is there at all, the fact that it is backed by this enormously powerful nuclear submarine.
So the number one story on Fox News all day is that certain U.S. House representatives did not sufficiently condemn sexual violence committed by Hamas on October 7. I mean, really, is this the most important thing for Americans to be concerned with? bizarre.
It's 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Gives you a...
Right. We're on the verge of World War III in Ukraine, over Taiwan, in the Middle East, and the focus of Fox News today is, dominantly did these various members of, is it the Squad or, these various left-wing Democrats, did they sufficiently condemn Hamas's, sexual violence on October 7?
Sense of what was originally planned and of how dangerous the situation in October actually was. It's a combination of extremely skillful diplomacy by the Muslim states, the Arab states in particular, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, they played perhaps the key role, and of course the BRIC states, the Chinese and the Russians, together with protests in the United States. But more especially, I think, the diplomacy, which has brought us back from that brink.
Yeah, what risk do you think there is that this is not a result of decisions made in October, where the Eisenhower is located, and perhaps there still is that impulse to launch a strike towards Iran?
I'm confident that the decisions were made in October, but bear in mind something. The fact that the Eisenhower is now in the Persian Gulf shows that no one up to this point has countermanded those orders. I mean, it's been positioned in the Persian Gulf. It's ready for a strike against Iran. The reason the strike against Iran isn't happening is because nobody's yet given the order that it should happen. The danger always is, in this kind of situation, that somebody will at some point push and demand that the order be given. And that tells us that the situation still, despite the fact that, there's all these signs that some people are trying to dampen the...
And on Fox News, every day they're just beating the war drums for war against Iran directly. Throughout the neoconservative news media, just beating the war drums for an unnecessary war with Iran, which would blow back in devastating ways for Americans, which Iran doesn't want, right? Iranian proxies have agency, right? It would be blamed on Iranian proxies, but these proxies may very well be acting not at the behest of Iran, but in their own interests, right? I don't think Iran signed off on the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, right? Because it's not in Iran's interest, and it was not part of the trajectory that Iran was on.
The situation, to bring it back under control, to bring the Gaza situation back under control, to accept that the objectives that Netanyahu, with Biden's backing, set out right at the start, going into Gaza, obliterating Hamas entirely, changing things, the entire situation there completely. Even though those plans, for the moment, have been abandoned, there's still not been a political decision, a full political decision, to call off the idea of a strike against Iran. So the Eisenhower has been allowed to steam all the way to the Persian Gulf, and it is there, and nobody yet, has made the order to pull it back. And that's incredibly dangerous. It tells you that argument in the White House, in the administration, is still ongoing. There are still tensions, and that there are still people within the administration who still hanker for that strike on Iran. So, this crisis is far from over. And I think, at the moment, the trajectory is towards some kind of stabilization. But people should not assume that it is over yet. I just wanted to say yesterday, we did on the Duran a program. It's not yet, I think, been published, with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson.
It's been published.
It's been published, okay. But anyway, if people see it, I mean, he talks about the neocons that he had to deal with within the US government. And he said that, at one point they were planning 7 wars. They're actually planning 7 wars. And he was in the Pentagon and he was listening to people, in all seriousness, planning 7 wars, one after the other. And he also described what it was actually like dealing with these people, the vociferous, angry way that they behave, the rudeness and the arrogance that they behave. And those people are still there. I mean, he had to deal with them before, but, they're still there. He had comments to make about Victoria Nuland, who he clearly knows. So he knows President Biden himself, by the way. You mentioned him. So you could see that this group is still there. You see how militant and dangerous they are. And all their weapons are in place. And they are still uncomfortably close to the trigger. So this crisis is...
Right. So if you want to feel important, what's going to make you feel more important than, say, bombing Iran? Getting involved in all sorts of drama overseas. Like, I like drama, all right? And when I'm not spiritually calibrated, when I'm not psychologically fit, I get myself into unnecessary drama. I over-disclose. I seek, inappropriate relationships with inappropriate people at inappropriate places. All right, I refuse to just keep my head down and pursue my healthy objectives. Instead, I like to get lost in unnecessary drama. if you're working in U.S. foreign policy, all right, you're going to get more of a feeling of importance from intervening overseas through hastening wars, or by encouraging Americans to step back from anything that's not in their vital strategic interest. Right? Unfortunately, incentives are aligned so that people do all sorts of things, such as cause wars, get into wars, that give them a tremendous feeling of importance, but are absolutely fatal for the nation state that they supposedly represent.
Far from over.
Yeah, it's a very, very dangerous situation. You know, the neocons, they're not going to let it go so easily, because this is as close as they've gotten, at least from what I can remember, to getting one of the most coveted wars they've been trying for, which is a war with Iran. I mean, the neocons, they have been wanting a war with Iran forever, it seems, and they're so close to getting it. So I don't think they're going to let this go too easily. I imagine there's a lot of debate and discussion in the White House to try and get something going towards Iran. But what kind of
and you think that Joe Biden isn't looking at the polls right now? The Democrats signed on with the Afghan and Iraq invasions in 2001, 2003, because they saw how successful the first Gulf War had been in 1991 and how damaging that had been to Democratic prospects politically. So that they signed on to these new wars, hoping that it would be good for them politically. Joe Biden is struggling in the polls, and he thinks by staking out some, bold, strong stance overseas, such as supporting Ukraine, supporting Taiwan, and possibly going to war with Iran, that the country will finally rally around him. They don't appreciate Biden's economics. They don't appreciate Biden running for re-election. They don't particularly care for Biden in any way, shape, or form. He is probably considering, maybe they'll like me if I stop bombing Iran.
What kind of a role do you think the media, the optics, the information war played in Israel and getting to the Biden White House to effectively say, we got to find an off-ramp to this? Because it seems like the images, the videos, the horrors that the entire world is seeing in Gaza, it seems like this has been one of the driving forces to get the Biden White House to seek some sort of prolonged ceasefire and eventually some sort of stabilization. Biden White House that is consumed with its with optics and with the media's perception of the administration. I mean, this is a top priority for them, and all of these horrific images, and even the labeling of Biden, Genocide Joe, that they call him. I mean, this has been a driving factor in getting to some sort of de-escalation.
Absolutely, it's very like what happened to LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, in the last just before he had to pull out. There were the protesters used to go and chant all kinds of things about Lyndon Johnson, and if you compare the chants of that time with the chants that are being made about Biden now, you can see the similarities. The language and the accusations are very, very similar. And what's happened is that just as LBJ in the 60s lost control of the media, lost control of the narrative. Remember, these people are obsessed with narratives. He lost it in the 60s, and Biden and his team lost it this time, because the fundamental problem, the thing they didn't take into account, was firstly that a lot more of the world cares about what goes on in Gaza and the Palestinian territories. The Muslim world cares. You can't control it in the way that you can control so many other things. And I think they also badly misjudged some of the sentiments amongst some of the grassroots in the Democratic Party, and that eventually had an effect on the media in the United States as well. And that had a snowball effect, and it got out of control, and it put the entire administration on the defensive. And it's played a decisive role, because for this administration, more than any other in the history of the United States, well, perhaps the Obama administration was similar, but media control is everything. That is what they're obsessed with. Obama to a certain extent, but a great extent was. This lot are obsessed with it even more. They're entirely postmodernists. I mean, they believe that, the narrative, if you can get the narrative accepted, it becomes the truth.
And Elliot Blatt says in the chat, it seems the elites are all about resigned to an inevitable Trump victory. I don't think they're at all resigned. They're doing everything they can to stop it. The ironic thing is that the more they try to do to stop the Trump victory, probably the more they hasten it, just as the more vitriolic Trump and his supporters became during his time in office, the less support that they got from the American public. So both Trump and his supporters and Trump and his opponents have vastly overstepped. The question is, which side has overstepped more?
The fact that the narrative was going in the wrong direction and basically hold them. I mean, they were shot under the waterline. They couldn't really survive this, and that is why they changed. But of course, if we go back to the neocons, first of all, they're less bothered about that kind of narrative than the Biden team are. Because the neocons aren't into the business so much of winning elections because they have a presence in both parties. They've got Nikki Haley now rising and all that.
Right. Think of all the press that Nikki Haley is getting as a possible alternative to Donald Trump. She's getting, she's getting praised all through the news media. Her chances are frequently getting vastly exaggerated. Right now I see absolutely no chance that she has for overtaking Trump, but she can tap essentially unlimited amounts of money, which just kind of goes to show you can't buy an election, right? Nikki Haley could spend $1 trillion and still not win the Republican nomination from where I stand, just like you could drop a ton of high quality cocaine in front of me and I would not be tempted to indulge in it. All right, we weren't born yesterday. All right, we did not evolve to be gullible. Americans in general, Republicans in particular, are not so gullible as to support Nikki Haley and her neocon agenda.
So that's not what their concern is. And besides, if they're worried that the administration is going to lose the election next year and that a new president, say Donald Trump, is going to come in and bring the whole thing to a stop, well, given that they're so close to getting their war, that is going to make them even more determined to try to get their war now rather than have it taken from them, possibly forever. So, you've got to always remember that there are these people there, and they are extremely difficult to control and contend. Colonel Wilkinson said how difficult to control they actually are and how impossible to argue with they actually are. And they will be running amok at the moment.
And what makes neocons so formidable is that they're incredibly cohesive and there's a lot of money to subsidize them. All right. There are all sorts of think tanks and journals that will publish them. Right. They have friends, they have community. They count for nothing in terms of votes, but they're a tiny group who's cohesive and highly funded and dedicated to unnecessary American intervention overseas, mainly in the guise of supporting Israel.
There'll be furious rows going on in the, in the executive, in the West Wing, in the National Security Council, in the Pentagon, in the State Department. You can imagine the anger and the fury and stamping of feet and the banging on desks that's probably happening, and the bad language that is being used also.
Yeah. Media control is baked in the cake with the Biden White House. It's baked into the man himself. It starts with him, the obsession with controlling the media and the narrative. So it's no surprise that they're so obsessed with the media narrative when it comes to this war as well. And it's backfired in a big way. They misjudged everything with regards to this war. They probably thought that it was going to go along the lines of Project Ukraine, where in the beginning, and even to a certain extent even today, the Biden White House does have a pretty good handle on the media narrative. It's starting to crumble now, but we're 2 years into the conflict in Ukraine. So they probably thought that what they did in Ukraine, all the fake news, siege of Kiev, ghost of Kiev, all that stuff, that they could probably do the same thing in Gaza, but it didn't work out. I wonder why. I wonder what was different about Gaza that wasn't there in the first year, say, of Project Ukraine.
Two things. The first is, as I said, the fact that an awful lot more people care about this war than I have to say this care about Ukraine. I mean, the last is not an easy thing to acknowledge because it is a war, and many more people have died in Ukraine than in Gaza, and just saying that. But nonetheless,
military
people,
not civilian.
Not
civilian.
Okay, we'll come to that. Civilian is the reverse.
Just to clarify,
You're talking about the totality of the number of people. It is a much bigger conflict, but people aren't personally and emotionally invested in it to the same degree. That's one. But the other thing, and this comes straight to the point you just made, is the way in which this operation was conducted. The enormous amount of bombing, and I've read pieces, and I think it was the Financial Times, which talked about indiscriminate bombing, the hundreds of buildings destroyed, the pictures of people being killed, pictures of children, and all of that. There was just far too much of that coming over far too short a time. One thing about in Argentina that
Okay, another good episode of the Duran was when they had Robert Barnes on about a week ago, talking about the situation in Argentina.
The president's talking about not having people meet with him or something. It's like, I just saw the headline, so I didn't see anything beyond that. But I think he fits within a long-standing tradition in Latin American politics and represents the continued failure of the professional managerial class.
Right, this is attorney Robert Barnes, who frequently shows up on Alex Jones's channel. He sounds great. When I listen to him, I feel good. But upon examination, many of his points fall apart. But I particularly like how he serves as a foil here to the main intellectual behind the Duran, Alexander Mercouris.
Across the globe. And it'll be interesting to see how he's able to experiment with public policy in ways that might challenge and counter the institutional control of central bankers. So I'm all in favor of that. I welcome his election, just for nothing else, for pure entertainment value.
Yeah, lots of interesting things. Can I just clarify a few points? The thing about Peron Because Peron's about one thing about in Argentina that I do know about, because I should say lots of Greek people emigrated to Argentina, including some members of my family way back in the 19th century. We've long since lost touch with them, but they were familiar with Peron. Peron was a very strange thing. He was both populist left and populist right at one and the same time. He was able to look in all kinds of directions simultaneously. And one of the things people don't know is this. Yes, he was a fan of Mussolini. He did allow all sorts of interesting people from Central Europe to come to Argentina after the war. He worked with the Vatican to get the passports. They ended up there, and we've all heard about that, and we all know about. What most people don't know about is that he was also somebody who worked, and this Peron was personally very interested in. He was very keen to get Jewish people to Argentina during the 1930s and 40s, and he made Argentina a major refuge for large numbers of people. Jewish.
Right, you hear about Argentina like welcoming Nazis, but what you don't hear is that they also welcomed a large number of Jews.
People from Europe, they went to Argentina at that time. That isn't widely known, but it was one of the great places that people were able to escape to. And he welcomed them, and he made it possible for them to come. And Argentine diplomatic missions played a role in facilitating that. So that's just one thing to say. The second thing about Peron is a very complicated domestic policy, very complicated foreign policy. It was a time, it was also his time, was when Argentina peaked. It was lending money to France. It was richer at that time than most of Europe was. It was
right in the 1880s. Argentina and Australia had I recall the highest per capita wealth in the world.
It was comparable in some ways in terms of its affluence to parts of North America. Now that was not because of Peron. Argentina had already been becoming an increasingly prosperous country throughout, before Peron became leader, but it sort of peaked under Peron. Problems really began after he was overthrown. He came to power through a coup. He was overthrown as a result of a military coup, and he went into exile. And then he eventually did return for a short time as president of Argentina in the 1970s. And one of the things people discovered there, to their surprise, is that the Peronist party had moved significantly to the left whilst he was himself in exile, I think in Spain mostly. And of course, what they discovered when he came back was that without having a very clear strategy or policy, he himself was actually quite far to the right. So there was already this tension within Peronism, which was visible at that time. And of course, he died in office, and his wife Isabella tried to take over, and she made an even bigger mess, and then made a huge mess. And then the
talking about Evita Peron.
Military stepped in, and that was a very brutal dictatorship. And then the military was overthrown in the early 80s, or rather fell in the early 80s at the time of the Falklands War. And we've had endless civilian government since then, and none has worked. And this is, as I said, this is where my points with Robert's points basically converge. You have a completely broken political system, a completely broken bureaucratic system. The governmental systems that have been created have never really worked at any point since. And it's unsurprising that people want to try something new. Two important last points. One, Argentina completely cut off from Europe. Very interesting place. I am, as is well known, something of a film buff. What isn't widely known was until about 1960, Metropolis, the famous film by Fritz Lang.
Okay, I'll skip the film bits. Let's get a little bit of Jean-Francois Gariepy from his December 2nd
because
show.
Of progressive empathy. Well, it's all good. It's all good to understand the problem of immigration and bringing in people who hate your country. But the problem is, Gad Saad is one of these people who's increasingly disliking our countries. And he's disliking our countries because of the bringing in of an absolute foreign conflict into our nations. A conflict that we shouldn't have had a bit of care for the last 100 years. It should have never become a question of so much importance, what's happening between Israel and Gaza and whatever. But we have imported this conflict in full, and hopefully one day it goes away. Hopefully one day the only people who care about Israel-Gaza is people who live in Gaza and people who live in Israel. As a last news item tonight, because I wanted to do a relatively short show, Dead Star says, "Hey Jeff, there's a young British YouTuber going by the name of Stephen J. James." I remember that name, Stephen J. James. He was on the regular chat here. He says, "Who I think is he is a long-time follower of yours. And I think he is on the precipice of abandoning his old life and jumping headfirst into life as a right-wing commentator. Do you have any advice or encouragement for the future dissident?" Well, I don't remember exactly Stephen J. James, what he was saying, but I remember the name, seeing him a lot on super chats and chats. There was a guy that was preparing for a modern-day debate, and I spoke to him in private. And he was saying, "How do you survive? How do you get a job once everyone knows your name and your face?" And I was like, "No, you don't get it. there's no having a job. Once you go public commentary in politics, and especially dissident and opposed.
It depends on what you say, right? Keep in mind, right, your family, your friends, your community, your enemies, and what a lawyer might do, and then speak accordingly, all right? You can present your ideas in ways that are more attractive rather than in ways that are more repellent.
To the Israeli axis, you're done for the rest of your life. You lose a lot of rights, you lose a lot of possibilities, and you certainly won't have a job at a normie.
Yeah, if you say that most of the problems in the world are because of the Jews or because of the blacks or because of the gypsies or because of the homosexuals, yeah, that's going to hurt your social and career prospects. But you don't have to speak in such a moronic manner.
Place. You may have a job with your uncle who knows you and he gets you into a position that no one will see you, but it will be through friends if you have a job or through contract work where you don't reveal your identity. But it's basically finished, this idea that you can use your name and get some work. So I would say that to Stephen J. James, if you do make the jump, be sure that you have plenty of resources in advance, that you have more than you need. Don't be just on the, I need this month's salary to survive. Be on the outlook for the future. Be on, I know how I would survive for the next 6 months or the whole year, even if I was to have zero income. That is how you have to think. And Bitcoin is your friend in this case, and being clever about your
Bitcoin is your friend. Terrible advice. Better advice is to conduct yourself online in a way that is best suited to your best interests and to the interests of your friends and community and your career prospects. Right? You can say a lot of things online. You just have to use some care in how you say them.
Bitcoin investment and trying to sell at the right time and buy at the right time. That will allow you, alongside the money that you make in super chats and commentary, that will allow you to have long-term sustainability. So yeah, I don't have much to say as a...
Yeah, don't say anything that you wouldn't want flashed on the billboard at Dodger Stadium in front of 55,000 people. Don't say anything on a live stream that you would not want to see accurately reported in the New York Times. Want to play a little bit more. Oh man, they're saying bloody podcast player broke. Let me try a different.
Shorter time for the Biden White House to be able to control that. And I think what ultimately was decisive in them losing control of the media on this was that the humanitarian agencies and the US Secretariat ultimately rebelled. Some of their people, of course, have also been killed in all of this. And faced with this overwhelming problem in Gaza, they came out and started to speak straightforwardly and openly about what was happening. And that was what caused the whole media control thing to collapse. It was entirely predictable, by the way. I mean, I remember, if you go back and watch our early programs, they predicted that something very like this would actually happen.
Yeah, the UN Secretary.
Okay, let's get a little bit more from this discussion here with Robert Barnes.
Kind of,
nationally, why he's beating Biden for the first time ever in the modern media polls, or beating any Democrat, because they never had him ahead in 2016. They didn't have him within shooting distance of winning. That's why he was such a big underdog when I went over to London and placed all those bets in Dublin on Trump.
Okay, and the chat's saying, look, the truth matters more to some people. Well, you can say the truth, but not say 100% of the truth. You can say the truth and take some care in how you phrase things, right? There's a great deal of truth that you can say publicly and not blow up your life, not blow up the lives of people who care about you.
In the same with the 2020 election, they never had him close. I mean, the median Biden was expected to win by a bigger margin than Barack Obama won in 2008 by 8 points or more. So now every media poll has Trump ahead, which means from an electoral college perspective, Trump has an insurmountable lead. He has a lead outside of what some might call the margin of fraud. But where a lot of that comes from in parts of the country, particularly Florida, particularly the Southwest, is the huge inroads he began making in 2020 amongst Latin American, Central American voters of that ancestry. Hispanic voters, as they're typically identified in the United States, doesn't make any sense because most of them don't speak Spanish. But that's the and it's the same kind of thing. Like the Mexican cowboy image in West Texas easily blends with Trump's uber machismo, New York City style approach. And so you're seeing like the...
Yeah, so this is some good commentary, useful commentary, thoughtful and realistic commentary here from Robert Barnes on the Duran.
What's interesting to me is that somebody like Milei, just like the El Salvadoran president, who's been wildly popular, looks at what Trump did successfully and imitates it in ways that other politicians around the world really aren't. I get it in Europe. Europe imagines Europe's still a snob continent, basically. Trump is too beneath them to imitate those kind of tactics and techniques. But I've been surprised that in places like most of the United States, people haven't looked at what Trump has done and emulated. And you look at Milei, he went from 2% in the polls, nobody knew who the guy was, to now the president of a major country in Latin America and in the world, in Argentina. Because he emulated Trump, over the top rhetoric, over the top language. Like he did that board with all the different ministers, and he's like, "This minister out, throw him in the trash. This minister out, throw him in the trash." Right now, that you could imagine like Berlusconi in Italy doing something like that.
Right, in Australia, in America, in England, in France and Germany and Scandinavian countries, Donald Trump is widely despised. But in much of Latin America, Africa, Asia, right, Trump is quite liked.
But tactically or in terms of marketing, but not as much elsewhere. And I wonder to what degree are those parts of the world, we've seen the Philippines, we've seen it parts of Asia, whether other parts, maybe Africa, and whether ever Europe at any level adopts Trump's style, even if not Trump's policies or Trump's approach, but the marketing tactics of Trump, or is that going to be something that's limited to the Americas? What do you think?
Well, I think it might, and I can just make one important point, which is that Donald Trump, as a political figure, as president of the United States, was a popular figure in much of the world outside Europe. People get this very wrong about Trump because, of course, perspective about the internet, many people of the United States still get the sense, still behave as if foreign opinion is European opinion. The European political class didn't like Donald Trump, period. They didn't like anything about him. They found him unpredictable. They didn't like what they sensed his politics were. They didn't like what they sensed his views of them was. And they didn't like him. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the world didn't. Trump was popular and successful in the Far East. He got on well with lots of Far East leaders.
Oh, great. The episode couldn't be played. Please try again later. Man, oh man.
All right, Alexander, let's do a video on the passing away of Henry Kissinger at the age of 100. So I guess, you're a historian. I'm sure you followed the life of.
I remember when he went to, on an Asian tour, right at the beginning, they were warm to him. They liked him. The Arab leaders liked him. I can easily imagine the African leaders and the Latin American leaders liking him too. And it could translate very well, possibly, conceivably, amongst people as well, provided, the sort of media control, which is pervasive around the world, breaks through. The more people saw of Donald Trump around the world, I'm not talking about Europe, but elsewhere around the world, the more they warm to him. The more they see of Joe Biden, and before that, of Barack Obama, the less they like them. And that's the thing that people don't understand. So just say, now, if you're talking about Europe, one country where one political leader did, to some extent, to a certain extent, try and copy Donald Trump and did succeed was Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And I mean, if you look at the Meloni style, which a lot of people found populist and unusual in European terms, it did succeed. But I think one of the problems is that increasingly now, a lot of people in Italy and in Europe are starting to think that that was a sham all along, and that she borrowed the style but not the substance, and that she promised in Italy more than she's delivered. Now, she's trying to do various things with family-friendly policies, family-friendly tax policies. But of course, she's trying to do that within the straitjacket of the European Union and its fiscal and legal structures. And the two are now increasingly colliding. And we've had this decision now by the German Constitutional Court, which has outlawed a budget maneuver that the German government, the current German government, tried to carry out. And that's going to make the fiscal landscape in Europe tighter still. And I think a lot of people in Italy were willing to back Meloni in a battle with the European Union. And I think that some of the enthusiasm for her, I mean, they would still vote for her now because they look at the alternatives and they say, what alternatives? But I think some of the enthusiasm, some of the excitement that was there when she was first elected has probably faded away because she has worked so hard to come across as this loyal EU team player. I mean, there was a story I read about her that she turned up at the first meeting with the EU officials with a cake, and she said, "Look, I've got this nice cake for you. I'm not a bad person. I'm on your side." And as Alex and I can say, if you give these people an inch, if you try to be friends with them, they will take you over. There is no meeting. There is no way you can meet with them, on sort of equal terms. You're either with them 100% or they're against you 100%.
Right. So there are people that you can make compromises with, and you should make compromises with to get along. And then other people are just your implacable enemies, and you can still make choices to infuriate them or to diminish their antagonism for you. But important to have clarity, whatever you choose. That will do it for me. I've managed to take the edge off. Going to watch a little football and go to bed.